Welcome everyone to the DC Bar. My name is Pam Robinson and I am the director of the DC Bar Communities Office. Tonight's program, the DEI Summit Follow-Up Discussion and Networking Event, is sponsored by the DC Bar Communities Office and the Communities DEI Initiative. The content piece of tonight's discussion will be recorded. The positions and opinions expressed by the speakers are strictly their own and do not necessarily represent the views of their employers, nor those of the DC Bar, its Board of Governors, or co-sponsoring communities and organizations. If you aren't a member of Communities and would like to learn more, please let me know, or visit the Communities page at www.dcbar.org. I will now turn it over to Angela Montez, Special Counsel with Evershed Sutherland and co-chair of the DC Bar Communities DEI Summit Planning Group, for opening remarks and introduction of our speaker. Angela.
Well, thank you, Pamela, and thank you all for joining us this evening for our DEI Summit follow-up discussion and networking event. As Pamela mentioned, I'm Angela Montez, and I had the honor of chairing this year's summit. We're pleased to bring together members of the DEI community for what we hope will be an engaging and eye-opening evening of fellowship. As you might recall, the theme for this year's summit was putting best intentions into action, and this event is really a continuation of that dialogue. It's also part of the larger DC Bar Communities DEI Initiative, whose mission is advancing the DC Bar's core organizational values of diversity and inclusion within the organization and the legal profession as a whole. To that end, we're privileged to welcome Linda Chanow as our speaker this evening to discuss what's really behind the lack of diversity in law firms, based on her organization's survey and report titled Diverse Outside Counsel, Who's Getting the Business? Before I introduce Linda, I'd like to take a moment to recognize Summit Vice Chair Kalu Sullivan, who's joining us virtually. She's a partner at the Kelly IP law firm, and she was instrumental in coordinating the summit and this event as well. I'd also like to thank the Summit Project Group, who worked this year to develop content, the theme, and agenda for the summit and for this evening's event. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to thank Pamela, who, as she mentioned, is the director of the DC Bar Communities, without whose efforts and expertise this event would not have been possible. So thank you very much. And now I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Linda Chanow. Linda is Chief Operating Officer at the Institute for Inclusion in the Legal Profession, a nonprofit executive, professor, lawyer, and nationally recognized authority on women lawyers. She has nearly 25 years experience researching, writing, and speaking on issues that impact the legal profession, including women's leadership, inclusive women's initiatives, allyship, growth mindset, resilience, lawyer well-being, unconscious bias, and flexibility programs. She's presented to over 100 audiences ranging from industry leaders to global law firms, to law departments, to students. Linda has authored or co-authored 7 publications, as well as 2 op-ed pieces for the Texas Lawyer. The Texas Minority Counsel Program honored her with the 2016 Lifetime Achievement Award, and Law Dragon named her one of the 100 leading legal consultants and strategists for 3 consecutive years. Linda was selected to serve on 2 presidential initiatives for the American Bar Association and as a liaison to the ABA Commission on Women in the Profession for 9 years. Linda began her legal career as a commercial litigator at Wilmer Hale in Washington, D.C., after graduating magna cum laude from American University's Washington College of Law in 1999. A fellow of the American Bar Foundation and a former member of the Dell Medical School Society for Health and Women, she currently serves on the board of the South Texas Naval Academy Parent Club and on the Solution Grants Review Committee for the Livestrong Foundation. Linda and her husband reside in Austin, Texas, where I think she's joining us from this evening. So please join me in welcoming Linda.
Thanks, Angela. I am thrilled to be here today. And thank you to Kalu for organizing this event and for the DC Bar's continued efforts to advance DEI in the legal profession. As Angela said, I will be talking to you today about our findings from the Institute for Inclusion's Legal Professions new report, Diverse Outside Counsel, Who's Getting the Business? Now, it's really not rocket science. We know, right, that corporate business plus diverse lawyers times satisfactory outcomes is going to lead to diversity in the legal profession. However, notwithstanding that equation, which we all know to be the case, we have seen over the past 30 years lots of efforts by outside counsel to promote diversity within the outside counsel firms in which they operate or that they hire. It's been over 30 years since then. GM General Counsel Harry Pierce issued what has come to be known as the Harry Pierce letter, in which he asked GM's outside counsel for greater diversity among the lawyers working on GM's matters. Since then, we've seen other corporate leaders emulate Harry Pierce, signing different diversity pledges and speaking or writing publicly to express their desire and commitment to see greater diversity among their outside counsel law firms. For example, many of you might remember the Charles Morgan Statement of Principle in 1998, and Rick Palmer's call to action, as well as Michelle Fang's GCs for Legal Diversity. It seems that every few years we see a new pledge by corporate GCs to promote diversity. Yet, despite these efforts, we haven't seen the kind of progress that what we wanted and what we expected. So this led my organization, the Institute for Inclusion in the Legal Profession, to ask who is really getting the business and how much of that business is actually going to diverse lawyers. And so now for the first time, the legal profession has hard data examining what that corporate diversity spend actually looks like. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So our study. So the methodology, so to give you some background, we had a 20-question survey tool, and then we posted that tool online and then marketed like crazy, getting general counsel to complete the survey. We guaranteed anonymity regarding individual responses. So you're going to see that our data is presented in the aggregate, and we didn't go into specific details about any corporation. Looking at the size of the corporations and organizations that participated, we had 136 corporations participate. 54% of those were in the Fortune 500. So that was our largest group, or Fortune 500. And then we had 23% were in privately held companies, and 14% were in other, and 8 were in the Fortune 1000, but not in the Fortune 500. Each respondent did not answer every question, so not everything's gonna have the same number of respondents. The greatest number of respondents is probably not surprising to folks, came from New York, California, Illinois, and Texas, with New York having the largest representation, 38, and California having the next at 26 organization or companies responding. Interestingly, one of the things that we were curious about is whether or not the efforts of these GC who were responding had anything to do with these other pledges, and whether or not they had participated in these pledges at some point in the past. Well, the majority of respondents weren't even aware of whether or not their company had ever signed a diversity pledge. So from our findings, we don't see a direct correlation between these calls to action and efforts to give work to diverse outside counsel. All right, so specifically, let's go into our findings. Now I'm going to go through pretty quickly, because I know we don't have a ton of time, our 10 sort of top findings, but of course there are more findings in the report, and I encourage you to look at them. There'll also be some time for questions after, so if you could hold those questions, it would be great, and I'm happy to answer, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Okay, so our first finding was that most corporate clients are in fact tracking the diversity of their outside counsel. So about 71% are tracking the diversity of outside counsel. 20% is doing so for all of their matters. 51% is doing it to a limited. They're looking at their dollar amounts and determining who they're gonna measure for for diversity. Interestingly, a full 30% said they were not tracking. So while we do have a lot tracking, we do have a third of the corporations that responded to our survey said they're not. Our second finding is the type of diversity most likely to be tracked is gender and race ethnicity. Religious diversity is rarely tracked. If you look at this chart, there's just, I mean, nobody is tracking religion, which is surprising. I mean, considering the attacks on religion that we are seeing more and more of. We're also seeing that more beginning to disaggregate the data, and you're going to see soon why we think it's really important to disaggregate the data. All right, finding number 3. This one's not that surprising. Corporate clients give most of their business to large law firms. So that's where, when they're looking at their diversity spend, most of it is going to large law firms, although large regional firms are receiving a fair amount of work. The small local law firms faring less well, except we have a very important exception, and that's our next finding. These supplier diversity efforts to include diversity-owned firms is resonating with corporate clients. So when they're giving work to smaller regional firms, they are giving it to diverse women and minority-owned law firms. So if you look here, substantial numbers here, 63% and 62%. The dark purple is women-owned law firms, and the light purple is minority-owned law firms. So while it's a small amount of business, it's more than 0, less than 10. We still have a significant amount of outside counsel who are focusing their efforts on giving some work to diverse-owned law firms. Importantly, though, women-owned firms are receiving much more work than minority-owned firms. And so if you see here, that's in this 10 to 24 range. You see this larger percentage going to women-owned firms. So 10 to 20. So what this chart means is corporations that are giving 10 to 24% of their business, all of their business, to outside counsel. 15% of that, 15% of those corporations are giving it to women-owned, and only 5% are giving it to minority-owned. And here, up here in this next level, you see still a little bit higher for women-owned firms than for diverse-owned firms. Now, LGBTQ plus owned firms fared worse, and disappointingly, not a single respondent assigned work to a disability-owned firm. All right, our fifth finding. What we found here was that some diverse lawyers benefit more than others. Specifically, white women receive well over half of the matters assigned to diverse outside counsel. That's this chart here. Again, so here you have dark purple is combined racial ethnic minorities, LGBTQ plus, and lawyers with disabilities are all combined in this purple. And then light purple are women, matters assigned to women. So this chart is looking at matters, so if you look at all the matters that were assigned to diverse outside counsel, how do they break apart by white women and by all other categories of diversity? And you can see up here these large amounts where the percentage of work given is much, much higher, and it's going to white women. In fact, most corporate clients give less than 10% of their entire spend to lawyers who are diverse. 58% of respondents reported assigning more than 0, but less than 10% of their matters to racial and ethnic minorities. Quite a disappointing number. So 58% of respondents reported assigning more than 0, but less than 10% to racial or ethnic minorities. And so let's look at how that breaks out. so in this chart here, you see the dark purple is represents companies who have given zero work to racial and ethnic minorities in that group. And so here for Native American lawyers, you can see that 40% of companies, almost 41%, said they gave zero, assigned zero matters to Native American lawyers, and 45% said that they gave more than zero but less than 10%. Similarly, Asian American lawyers, very, very low here. 23, almost a quarter of the companies that responded said they gave zero work to Asian American lawyers. And 71% said they gave 0 to 10%. And none of the groups received work in any significant amount in any category above 10%. So when we look at LGBTQ plus lawyers, it really was noticeable that corporate clients do not collect this data. Over 45% of respondents said the amount of work assigned to LGBTQ plus lawyers was either unknown or that they did not track that type of diversity. Nevertheless, for those that did track LGBTQ plus lawyers, over 40% assigned more than 0 but less than 10% to LGBTQ plus lawyers. Another 7.8, so nearly 8%, assigned between 10 and 24% of work to LGBTQ plus lawyers. So this is a great example. Like if you track it, if you measure it, you get to see some results. So for those who do track it, we see some numbers here. So when it comes to assigning business to lawyers with disabilities, again, we see it's a little disappointing here. You see lawyers with disabilities were the least likely group to receive work from corporate clients. Almost 19% of respondents reported assigning no matters at all to lawyers with disabilities. Okay, so finding number 7, this is a really important finding. What we saw, because we wanted to look at intersectionality and see what was happening for women of color. A lot of people don't realize that women of color make up the majority of diverse lawyers. And have for more than almost 2 decades. And so when you're looking at diverse numbers, if you don't pull apart and look at what's happening for women of color, you are not seeing sort of the real story of what's happening for diverse lawyers. And so what we found in our study was that women of color receive very little business compared to men of color or white women. Most of the work that was assigned to women went to white women. Most of the work assigned to people of color went to men of color. And so while we did see a little bit of work going to African American and Hispanic women, we saw almost none going to Asian American women or Native American women. And that's this chart here. So you can see these blue lines are women and are white women. And then you see these purple is Hispanic, red is Asian American. So you can see these really super tiny here, and then some more for African American women and Native American. So this is a number that's really important for us to be paying attention to. And one of the things that we're really pushing corporate clients to do is to disaggregate the data. So when they're looking and measuring women and lawyers of color, that they're really saying, okay, wait a minute, are we giving any work to women of color? Again, being the largest group of racial and ethnic minorities in the profession. All right, so now let's go into what happens after they collect the data. So what we found is that sometimes corporate clients review and discuss diversity data with their outside counsel firms. but also sometimes they don't. So 60% of our respondents said yes, they do something with the data. They either review it or they discuss it. But a clear 40% said they don't do anything with the data. And anecdotally, what we hear from the law firms is that really causes problems and really hurts their efforts internally to promote DEI. Okay, so very few, so taking that further, very, very few corporate clients actually set diversity goals and targets for their outside counsel. So a full 82% answered no, they do not set diversity goals and targets for their outside counsel. So why? So this is where we went to the comments to see what they were saying. And so for instance, I'm going to read a couple quotes to you. One corporate counsel said, "We've neither the time, personnel, or interest in having to police our outside counsel. We tell them we want to see more diversity, but we shouldn't have to monitor it. We're not going to get dragged into setting their diversity goals for them. At some point, they need to take responsibility." Another corporate counsel said, "I don't tell my outside counsel what their diversity goals should be. I just tell them that if I don't see more diversity in the lawyers handling our files, I can get a minority-owned firm at a better billing rate." A third corporate counsel said, "If I tell my outside counsel that our company wants more diversity, they should get it done. I shouldn't have to get into the nitty-gritty of their internal staffing decisions." So you see a real, real reluctance for the corporations to get involved. But you also see, I think, a frustration of the corporate counsel saying, well, this is our wish. Why aren't the firms working harder to make this happen? We're giving significant business and we're not seeing it happen from the firm side. So what happens when they review this data and they see that firms are not making any progress? Well, the bulk of the responses fell into 4 different categories. 1, a letter to that outside counsel firm. 2, a call or a meeting to that firm. And then some corporations have instituted the carrot and the stick. So some of them are giving bonuses if you do meet the diversity goals, and others are penalizing. And let's talk a little bit about each of those. So with the letter, usually these letters are pretty soft. They're encouraging, saying that they're disappointed and really want them to begin to do more and to make more progress. The meetings can be similarly sort of on that sort of softer nudging, but what we have found is that you're more likely in these meetings to see the corporate client say, how can we help? What can we do? How can we partner to make sure that this actually happens? And what we're hearing from the law firms, we're hearing that these meetings make a tremendous difference, that it really gives the in-house folks or the internal folks at the law firms more leverage to make things happen on the DEI front. The penalties, the stick. So some clients are comfortable using the stick and to encourage outside counsel. When they're applied, they generally take the form of denying new work to those law firms, not taking away existing work, which makes sense if matters are already in business. So it's future rather than current business. With the carrot, we see this the least frequently, but there are some notable examples. And this is, in the form of bonuses and things to say, if you reach our goals, we're going to reward you with increased fees. So there are some other strategies that exist, and let me just real quickly throw a couple of these up here so you can sort of see. what we're doing. I don't know that I'm going to read all of them, but here's an internal awards program. Here at one corporation, they take the report, they review it, and the best group gets presented in person to senior leadership. We invite people to fill the tables when they're supporting various diversity bar associations, so opportunities to network with the lawyers at the corporation to hopefully get more business. The networking events seem to be one of the big ways that folks are rewarded. All right, so recommendations. I'm going to quickly go through these. I know I'm getting, I think, up on my time, but I want to at least share a few with you. Again, there are more recommendations in the report, but here is sort of our key recommendations mostly for outside counsel, but those of you that are in law firms, this can apply as well. So first, establishing key KPIs, setting goals, setting where you want to go, how much business you want to see, what percentage of business, those type of things. You need to have those goals and internal measurements to see if you're going towards those goals. If you don't, if it's loosey-goosey, you're not going to actually be able to see the process or see the progress. We know that we set, corporations have goals for everything else and have timelines. It has to be done for the diversity efforts as well. And this is the same for those of you that are in law firms. We highly recommend this type of planning and setting goals and how you're going to meet those goals. And we have sample KPIs that are available in the report. The next is, of course, give more matters to diverse outside counsel, but it's also the fact that it's like significant matters, not just, busy work or, little matters. We need to see more work going to diverse outside counsel. Track the diversity of who's doing your work and who is getting the credit. I mean, this is, it's so important to actually see who is doing the work on the teams, the level of the work, the kind of work that's being done, and who is actually getting the monetary credit for your matters. Disaggregate the data. You need to see, one of the things that we know is that, so for instance, Asian American lawyers, they are least likely to convert to partner. So if you're not actually seeing the type of diversity represented by your matters, who you're giving the work to, you can't see where some of the problems may be occurring. It's not all the same data or all the same to who you're sending the work to. So the preferred provider lists. So, a lot of corporations have preferred provider lists, and they cause some problems because how do you incentivize and do things when you're required to use certain lists? Well, we give a whole bunch of examples and things that you can do when you're have preferred provider lists to help to still promote diversity. And so make sure that you know that kind of information is in the report and don't get waylaid because you're restricted to using a certain small group of firms. And again, as I mentioned earlier, meeting regularly with outside counsel. This is, we think, one of the top things that outside counsel can do to really move the ball forward is to meet regularly with outside counsel, with their teams, with those diversity numbers intact, and having conversations on how the ball is going to be moved forward. And then hold the firms accountable. So when it's not happening, you need to figure out in advance what you're going to do in order to ensure that the firms are moving forward. And finally, we at the Institute for Inclusion in the Legal Profession, we promote inclusion, all types of inclusion, and we think we can't really see the numbers move unless we find ways to include straight white men in the conversation. And so that would be our last recommendation here. All right, so that's the findings of the report. If you want to learn more or download a copy, you can do so at www.theiilp.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
So we'll open the floor to questions. I'm not sure if Linda can hear them unless they're through the microphone. Okay, perfect. So any questions? Would you like to thank you for joining us? Would you like to say a few remarks or?
Oh, well, certainly I'd love to. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for this program. Linda probably can't hear me, but I was active in the Women's Bar when she was active in presenting programs on women in the legal profession. So it's great to hear this evening. And thank you so much for the work that the communities are doing. It's just been, we are so grateful to you for kicking off our focus on DEIA. And as I think you may know, we have appointed a DEIA task force that is going to start looking into what recommendations that they can present to the Board of Governors so that we can engage in actionable, measurable, and really impactful change in our legal community and our legal profession. So, and one of our members is here, Ethel Badawi. So we're grateful to her service on the task force, and we should be, and Chad Sarchio as well. So we should be kicking off within the next month with that effort. So Linda, it's Ellen Jakovic. First of all, I just wanted to say hello. I remember when you were active in the Women's Bar, when you were here in DC and presenting to us on women in the legal profession and retention and advancement.
Very nice.
So
to
it's
see
wonderful. Great to see you again. And thank you for presenting. And the question I had kind of is a tee off to our task force. Do you have any recommendations for what we as a mandatory bar and as our voluntary communities can do to help advance DEIA in our legal profession, and maybe some tangible recommendations that you have for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's, as a bar association, as a mandatory association, you have very, specific requirements and a mandate, and that, and not to mention you are dealing with members, right? So those things make your organization very unique and in ways that you'll need to approach some of these issues. I mean, one of the things that we have learned that, we know always that it starts at the top. And so understanding and making sure the folks who are on your board and who are part of the leadership of the organization really get it and understand it, and starting to track your own efforts. So what within your organization, what is the diversity on the board? And again, thinking through, this is one of my big focuses on women of color, because too often I think we miss this really critical group in our profession. And so noting how many people you've represented, but of course numbers are not the only thing, right? Some of it is the effort. We know belonging and inclusion is a big part. So are you creating spaces where women of color and people of color feel comfortable coming and feel welcomed coming, and that each board member, each person involved in this effort takes real tangible steps to make sure that they are creating a very welcoming environment. And how do you do that? That's one of the things that I talk a lot about. How do you use your position to create space that is welcoming to all, particularly when you are white and you perhaps don't have the experience or the empathy to do so easily. Then of course, it's looking out at what you're so some of that is intentional, reaching out to people, not waiting for people to come to you. That is, I think, one of the most critical things that folks can do is how are you, each of your leadership, reaching out to people to bring people in and get involved in the different parts of what the Bar Association is doing. I mean, I could go on and on this, and I'm happy to talk offline with people if it would help, but that's where I would start. I mean, it really truly starts at the top, and having that buy-in and that willingness to put yourself out there and to learn and to realize you don't know everything and that you don't know the experiences of people. I think it should be mandatory that, every person who's on the board of a bar association attend and participate in diversity events with people that don't look like them. Until you actually feel what it's like to be the only person that looks like you in the room, then you can't really show that empathy that is necessary in order to create the welcoming environment. And so, and that's actually something I learned from Tom Mars way long ago, who was the general counsel of Walmart, where he talked about the critical impact it had on him personally as a middle-aged white dude, is what he would always say, like going to diversity conferences and being the only, middle-aged white guy in the room, and how that really taught him to have greater empathy.
Thank you for that. Other questions? Yes.
I'm trying to understand the statistics. Are you referring to the partner, the relationship person on the case, the person who work, who's making up the case?
Sure.
What's that?
Okay, Linda, I don't know if you can hear that, but the question was, you talked about where sort of matters are going, and within sort of a firm, is that sort of to the lead partner, to someone who's more junior, sort of what does that makeup look like within the data? And I think that's a sort of
yeah. So our question asked primarily responsible for the matter. So that would be the lead, at least what what the client thought was the lead person on the matter. Not necessarily. We know that sometimes the person who presents as the lead isn't the person who's actually getting credit for the matter. So we did not get behind the credit numbers, but we did ask the lead person on each matter. Yeah. And so that's probably why we're looking at, 10% or below, because, who are the leads, where we're seeing a lot of firms will present, or try to present diverse teams, but the lead on the team is going to be a white man, because we still, 80% of partners at law firms are still white men.
so, what I think might make sense is for folks to be able to ask the questions directly. So I'll hand the mic over.
Right.
Thank you to our presenter, and thank you, President Jacobic, for the initiatives at the DC Bar. It was fascinating, but at the same time, as a minority lawyer, not surprising. There was a slide, was very interesting, and it showcases that, when we're talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, especially in the corporate world, there was a comment saying that, hey, if you're not going to make it diverse, then we're going to go to a minority-owned law firm at a lower rate, as if, minority-run law firm, the quality is lower, so therefore we charge less. So my question would, and that's about the sort of not just fighting diversity, inclusion, equity in terms of numbers, but in terms of the attitude, in terms of the culture, in terms of understanding that we are not just talking about numbers, we are talking about perspectives, we are talking about different backgrounds and achievements. So what can be done in terms of fighting the culture, fixing the culture? And that comment resonates, that when you're talking about minority law firms, there is that stereotypical attitude toward law firms that are run by minorities. So that would, and again, thank you for all the numbers in this great presentation.
Yeah, such a great question. Thank you for asking. And it's a real problem. You've put your finger on a real problem, and this is true despite the fact that we know that diverse lawyers have been leaving the big firms now for decades and starting firms. And so you have folks who were trained by the big laws but big law firms who are significantly, very qualified and doing amazing things, but you still have some of these underlying stereotypes and attitudes. And so interestingly, we did do a second study we finished this year where we looked at the use of minority-owned and women-owned law firms. And so if you go to our website, same website that we have up here, you will see that this other report is right on the front page, easy to get to. And one of the myths we are trying to dispel by that report is the quality of the firms who fall into these categories and why corporations should be using them more. So they're using them, but a lot of times it's very niche work. It's not the big dollars. And so we try to, in this new report, encourage in-house folks to think beyond that and to think bigger and to understand the expertise that they're missing by not using the minority and women-owned firms. And so I encourage you to look at that report as well. I don't have the data readily, but we went, it's very, very detailed. We partnered with NAMWOLF on the report, and we said, in what type of matters are you hiring diverse lawyers or diverse owned firms, and what are you thinking, and incentives. And so I know every time I now talk to a corporate client and we do our DEI consulting, we talk about what are you doing with regards to NAMWOLF firms, and that you should be thinking bigger about sending more work into those firms.
Well, great. I just want to thank you again for joining us, and please enjoy the food and drinks, and look forward to having conversations with everyone. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Take care.